If you're serious about history as lived experience, not just dates and battles, this episode is for you. Before we go any further, make sure you're subscribed to the Legacy of Survival channel and share this with someone who studies civilian wartime resilience. Because what we're covering today rarely makes it into textbooks. This isn't nostalgia, and it isn't theory. These are documented, practical shelter fixes ordinary families made during World War II, when bombs, shortages and displacement turned broken furniture into life-saving material. Stay with me, because the next minute matters. What most people misunderstand about civilian survival in World War II is that shelter wasn't a fixed thing. Homes were damaged repeatedly, supplies vanished, and families adapted room by room, night by night. Furniture wasn't trash when it broke. It was timber, springs, padding, and hardware. The difference between exposure and endurance often came down to how well someone could repurpose what was already inside the house. How smashed wardrobes became emergency wall reinforcement during air raids. When blast waves cracked masonry or blew out interior walls, large wardrobes and armoires were dismantled and pressed into service as secondary barriers. Families pulled the thick wooden panels apart and screwed or nailed them across damaged sections of walls, especially stairwells and shared walls between row houses. This added mass and slowed flying debris during subsequent raids. In practical terms, this technique can still be applied today by understanding load direction. Thick wooden panels placed diagonally across a weakened opening distribute force better than thin boards nailed straight across. WWII to bus and civilians learned this through repetition, not manuals. How dining tables were converted into structural roof props after partial collapses. In cities like London, Hamburg and Warsaw, partial roof collapses were common. Families dragged heavy dining tables upstairs and wedged them beneath sagging beams. Table legs were shortened or stacked on bricks to create vertical props that reduced further collapse risk. The lesson here is straightforward and timeless. Any rigid, wide-footed object can become a temporary load-bearing support if pressure is transferred straight down. Survivors didn't guess. They tested stability by applying weight gradually and listening for stress sounds before committing to sleeping beneath those structures. Now, let me tell you how bed frames were transformed into blast-resistant window barricades. Metal and wooden bed frames were stripped of their mattresses and then mounted inside window recesses. Families would fill the gap between the frame and the glass with books, folded clothing, or, if they had it, sand. The frame itself would absorb shrapnel and flying glass, while the packed material slowed down anything trying to get through. You know, this wasn't about stopping a bomb outright. It was really about preventing those fatal secondary injuries. Modern survivalists, well, they can actually replicate this principle using any rigid frame combined with dense layered infill to protect against debris, whether it's from storms or explosions. Now, here's something a bit clever. How broken chairs became airflow-controlled ventilation systems in shelters. In basements that were converted to shelters, maintaining airflow was absolutely critical for survival. Broken chair backs and legs were put together into adjustable vent covers that let air circulate, all while blocking out debris. And you see, those slats weren't just thrown together. They were spaced deliberately, not randomly, to strike that balance between airflow and protection. This detail matters. If things were too tight, oxygen dropped. But if it was too open, dust and fragments entered. The same principle applies today when improvising ventilation in enclosed spaces. Control, not maximum airflow, is the goal. Let me tell you how dressers were repurposed into insulated sleeping enclosures. When homes lost exterior walls, families would dismantle large dressers and use the panels to build sleeping boxes against interior walls. These enclosures trapped body heat and reduced exposure during winter. Drawers were filled with straw, rags, or paper, and stacked as insulating layers. This wasn't comfort. It was survival thermodynamics. Reducing air movement around the body conserves heat faster than adding layers alone, a principle modern cold-weather survival training still teaches. Now, it might sound a bit odd, but folks found that sofa springs and padding could actually reinforce ceilings against falling debris. You see, even after sofas were destroyed by blast pressure, they weren't just thrown away. Instead, the springs were nailed beneath ceiling joists, making these sort of flexible catch layers for any falling plaster and brick fragments. And the padding? Well, that was packed above beds to help absorb the impact, giving people just that little bit more protection. Survivors quickly realized, that flexible systems dissipate energy much better than rigid ones. It's a bit of wisdom that's still relevant today, whether you're designing shelters or building impact-resistant structures. Flexibility can mean the difference between safety and disaster. Another clever trick involved converting cabinets into concealed food and water protection units. Broken cabinets were rebuilt into low-profile storage units, tucked away under stairs, or even hidden inside false walls. These setups helped keep rationed food and water safe from dust, pests, and, confiscation. Whenever possible, panels were sealed up tight with cloth strips and wax, just to make sure nothing got in or out. So, the takeaway here is about redundancy and concealment. Shelter survival isn't just about walls and roofs, It's about protecting calories and hydration from environmental contamination. Now, here's how crib frames and small furniture became child-specific shelter adaptations. Families with children adapted broken cribs into protective frames around sleeping areas. These structures reduced rolling debris injuries and gave children a defined, psychologically stabilizing space. This matters more than most accounts admit. Survival isn't purely physical. Maintaining routine and perceived safety, actually improved compliance during long shelter periods. These fixes weren't clever tricks. They were learned behaviors, refined through repeated exposure to danger. What makes them valuable today is not nostalgia, but transferable logic. Use mass to block debris. Use flexibility to absorb impact. Control airflow deliberately. Repurpose what already exists instead of waiting for ideal tools. That is the real legacy of civilian survival in World War II. If this kind of grounded, practical history matters to you, subscribe to the Legacy of Survival channel, share this with fellow historians and preparedness-minded viewers, and keep these lessons alive. Because the past only helps us if we're willing to study how people actually survived it.